This is Greg Canty here, and welcome to the Win Happy podcast. Stay tuned for interesting chats with interesting people about winning their lives and being happy at the same time. This show has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. Thanks for listening. On the 12th of September 2021, a 40-year-old married, father of four, Philip McKinley, was ordained a deacon of the Protestant Church. In part one of this two-part podcast, Philip talks about a life-changing visit to Uganda at the age of 18, about growing up as part of a religious family, and his work with immigrants, including initiatives such as City of Sanctuary and the Discovery Gospel Choir. He also talks about racism in Ireland and how we can combat this huge problem. Let's hear from Philip. Philip McKinley, a huge welcome to the Win Happy podcast. How are you doing?
I am well if you're well, Greg. Thanks a million for having me.
Well, it's piddling out of the heavens in Cork.
And you see, you need the blue skies of Dublin for. They're grey skies, but they're dry grey skies.
I'm having an interesting morning. I was at a Cork Chamber of Commerce breakfast. They do them, once a month, and we had Simon Coveney speaking.
Great.
Yeah, giving us the whole lowdown about the protocol and Ukraine and food prices and everything else. He's a really, really great man. Like in Cork, people would know the family and everything, kind of going back a long time.
Sure, his father.
And he got everyone's attention in a really, really interesting way. He was speaking about how Ireland has become such a changed place. And he said his folks use foster kids.
Oh.
And he said in 1970, he had a little black brother.
Right.
And he said he would hold the hand of his black brother walking down Patrick Street. And he said the crowds would literally part, at the scene. Like, what is this unusual creature? Because I think we grew up in an era of Phil Lynott, and he was like the huge curiosity in Dublin, wasn't he?
That's what they say, yeah. The medical students in Trinity, that was often a comment, yeah.
Yeah, and of course, when we were growing up, there was a family that weren't too far away from us. I used to have a newspaper around as a young fella, the Isaacs. It was just one particular family. I think the lady, Mrs. Isaac, she married a black pilot, and they grew up here, so they were a real curiosity for this family that looked different to the rest of us.
Yep.
And John Spillane, the singer, I'm not sure if you're familiar with John Spillane.
Yeah. He's
got the song about going to Ballincollig. And there's a line in it about Johnny and Davy Isaac and Bozo the dog. So that was the Isaacs, and Bozo the dog chased me more than once as I was doing my newspaper deliveries. So I've got a big question for you.
Yeah.
It's the 12th of September, 2021. We get out of bed and there's a big day ahead. What is going on in your head?
Yeah, well, hey, that was the day I was ordained a deacon, and that I was 40 years of age. I guess I'm a bit of a believer in numbers and ages and seasons of life, and 40 is a symbolic number. It's the number of weeks of a pregnancy. So certainly in biblical literature, when you see the number 40, it's actually pointing towards a kind of rebirth experience, or it's like a pregnancy. It's like a womb experience. And someone like Carl Jung, the psychoanalyst, said, the first half of life is building up the ego. The second half of life is tearing it down. So that there really is a kind of first life and second life. And whether it's marked by the midlife crisis at the age of 40, and my midlife crisis was entering the church in this form, I don't know. Some people go fast cars, other people go into into the church. So you can take whatever you want. I haven't got a fast car.
Not yet.
Not well. It's in the garage at the moment. So, but But yeah, that was my age 40 feeling, a culmination of loads and loads of things, that was the right thing to do, and saying, "Here I am, Lord," which is a pretty countercultural, possibly revolutionary thing to to let go and surrender and see where this takes me.
Yeah. And
Um,
that particular day, what were you thinking that morning?
I don't know. I mean, a lot of this I don't kind of dwell too much on. I definitely, a couple of things got me to this point. One was 3 deaths of 3 friends in close succession, and they were all ordained, and they all died of cancer, and they all died within about a month of each other. And one was a very inspiring guy. He died at 42, Graham Jones, and he had 3 daughters and his wife. And through a very strange circumstance, he had been interviewed on Would You Believe, on RT's Would You Believe, but he'd lost some of the contacts. And I had a contact in RTE. So his brother rang me and said, look, he was ordained deacon about 2 years prior to me. And the normal course is you're ordained a deacon and you're there for 1 year, and then you're ordained a priest. That's what happens within the Church of Ireland. I'm a deacon in the Church of Ireland. But because he developed cancer and his illness progressed really, really rapidly, they actually ordained him deacon in September and then ordained him priest in December, or maybe November, late November. And anyway, the brother asked me, do I have any of these contacts for Would You Believe? I did, but in doing so, he disclosed when this ordination was taking place. But actually, Graham had either come from the hospital or even come from the hospice to it. So it was very restricted numbers because he was extremely immunocompromised. He was in a wheelchair. He was clearly physically, it had taken its toll. But I then arrived at the ordination not knowing that really it was very much for close family. So I felt very sort of embarrassed to be there, or I didn't feel. But they said, no, please stay. Anyway, I just stayed at the back of things. And about a week later, I got this phone call. Now I knew Graham well, but not well enough that I didn't have his number saved in my phone. So it was an unsaved number. Rings. And he says, "Hi, Philip, it was great to see you last week." And I said, "Oh, listen, I'm so sorry." And I muddled up and I thought, I didn't realize, blah, blah, blah. And I told the whole story. And he said, no. He said, I just wanted to call you because the Lord told me to tell you to get ordained. And I went, "Oh, thank you."
That was nice of him.
It was very nice. And like the conversation was probably like a minute, 30 seconds. And then I put the phone down. And he died about a week later. And I came back in to my wife and I said that was Graham Jones, and he this is what he rang me to say. And so she just said, "Well, then you have to do it." And it was kind of simple and easy. But I've wrestled, and I think wrestling is a beautiful and really important thing to do in faith. So I wrestled for a long, long time. And particularly those 3 deaths, something like the phone call from Graham, you ask yourself, when I'm on my deathbed, who am I? How have I lived my life? What have I done? And what on my deathbed will I look back and say this was the right thing to do? So I think on the morning of the 12th of September, it was probably a feeling, here we go. But I think this is the right thing to do.
Yeah. You thinking of Graham?
Yeah, thinking of Graham. The other 2 guys were Robert Lawson. Robert was an amazing guy, worked in the chemistry department in DCU. Any notions that there's a segregation between faith and science, Robert would blast out of the water because he's a chemist. Chemistry is background and Christianity side by side. And then the other was a Methodist minister called John Stevens. And they all made their own different impacts and all kind of gave me something to work with. And like I say, all died young, before they'd retired from various forms of cancer. So all of that whirling through my head.
And of course, you're married at this point. You have 4 kids.
Yes, it's the advantage of the church. Advantage of the Church of Ireland. My dad is a clergyman. My grandfather's a clergyman. Half uncle a clergyman. There's 8 clergy in the family. So I'm often asked, what's my attitudes on priests marrying. And I say I'm 100% in favor of it, because if I was anything to the contrary, I wouldn't exist.
Yeah. No. Yeah, totally. I kind of get that. And that conversation with your own family, your wife and your kids on that day, what was that like? Like, it was hugely significant for them as well, because Dad was becoming a different thing suddenly, wasn't he?
Yeah, the timeliness of things. Dad had served 51 years. He'd been 45 years in one parish, a little sort of on the edge of the suburbs and up into the Dublin Mountains, Whitechurch parish, foothills of the Dublin Mountains in Marley, back in Marley Park. And he'd been there for 45 years. He'd been serving since 1976. Elvis was still alive when he started in the parish, and now he was retiring. So there was a 2-week window when I was ordained deacon, and he was finishing up as his as rector in Whitechurch. So he actually preached at the ordination in. It was also in the really iconic and staggering surrounds of St. Bridget's Cathedral, Kildare, which is the ancient historic site of Bridget since 480 AD. That is where she founded her church on the hill in Kildare town. So you're also stepping into history and resonating with all that has gone before. So that's another big pinch me kind of moment. This is much bigger than me.
And your own kids, Philip, because that day suddenly Dad became a priest. That must be a strange thing for a kid. Did you chat to your guys about that? Did they have a view on it, or how did that work?
Well, I mean, immediately they said, now we've got two mummies because both our parents wear dresses. But but they were very supportive. I mean, there's kind of no way to kind of do it apart from actually doing it.
Yeah.
And like they've all been very supportive, and especially Julie, my wife, just really, really encouraging. And like I say, they're just like really key moments because like ultimately you're entering into something that is quite sacrificial at its heart. That's what it's supposed to be, a kind of letting go and a giving away. And that's why I call it countercultural, even kind of revolutionary, because at its heart, it is a surrender. It's a letting go of the ego. So that getting out of your control and letting go of something, that's not easy. So, but I mean, I couldn't do it without family, couldn't do it without my wife, couldn't do it without the support of my kids. None of that. I know there are single or celibate Church of Ireland clergy, just as there are Catholic priests who are obviously celibate and single and so on. But I personally am not wired that way. I don't know how it could be done without the emotional supports of a wife and family.
Okay, so what I'd like to do for the listener is to get to know that Philip a little bit. The person at 40 years of age on the 12th of September 2021 and everything that went beforehand, that story that kind of brought you to making that decision. So you've told me that your dad was a pastor, he was a priest. Other than that, who the hell was Philip and where did he come from?
Greg, cheapers. I mean, loads of things, as we all are, and lots of complex layers of things. I grew up in Dublin. A big experience for me was I went, like a lot of people, to Africa, to Uganda at the age of 19. And,
why? What brought you there?
There was a couple of things. I tell you, I actually had a friend who was a good friend of A.D. Roach's, and I sent an email or something to the Chernobyl Children's charity, and just to see was there an openness for something. And I don't know, this was the very early beginnings of a kind of social conscience awakening. I'd gone to a private secondary school, came out at 18, and I was probably very wet behind the ears, really, and naive. And I had hoped to do film. I ended up, though, getting points to do radio broadcasting, actually, in Dún Laoghaire Institute of Art Design Technology. And on the very first day, the course coordinator, I think he saw here, is this really, this guy is very sheltered. We need to stretch him out a bit. And he handed me a microphone and a mini disc recorder. In the days of mini disc recorders, and he said, take the 46A bus and go down to the People's Park in Dún Laoghaire, and I want you to interview the heroin addicts in the People's Park. So I got the 46A, having never sort of hardly been on a bus, and got there, and they had two children, and I remember they were the two kids with this particular family. The two kids were kicking an empty bottle to one another, and then I met the mum and dad, and I remember the mum was missing a lot of teeth, and she was probably in her 30s, and we just sat on a bench and spoke for an hour. And I'd say I learned more about my neighbor, more about myself, certainly, more about God than I did in probably all my life up to then. And I actually found radio as a brilliant, brilliant way to develop a social awareness, because one of the big things, and you'll appreciate this from your own background in communications, like have a microphone in your hand and you can go to a rioting mob, you can go to a fella that's about to jump off a bridge, you can go to, and you have, can I talk to you? And it opens up a whole, and I mean, if somebody's a lion tamer, you're just, you're the more interesting, the more quirky somebody is, the more desperate you are to just learn their story and hear and dig and unpack and enrich all that. So I think that gave me a whole kind of new way of seeing the world. That then led to a kind of social conscience in a way that maybe wasn't there before. The A.D. Roach thing, though, didn't work out. I didn't get a reply, or something happened. So I ended up looking at another organization, which was a mission society, church mission society, and that's what got me in Uganda. And I was there for 4 weeks, and I was probably sick in bed for about 3 weeks of it. So I look back now and I think, what was it that actually had this profound impact, given that I was in bed most of the time? But anyway, I think just seeing the world in a whole new prism, seeing the utter, without being crass, I mean, there is a particular form of wealth in Europe, and there is also a particular form of grotesque poverty. And then there is a form of poverty in Africa, and there is also a form of exceptional wealth. And I, as a white first world urban Western European male, maybe saw the world in a particular way, and just Africa and Uganda blew that out of the water in 100 million different directions. And I'm still operating a lot from just what kind of shock that gave me. So, and like I say, I'm always kind of cautious of this story, because there's lots of privileged Europeans go to Africa and say, oh, it's always a turning point in life. But it kind of coincided as well with the beginning of significant migration to Ireland, particularly from outside of Europe. And literally, like when I was in Uganda, you had the Lord's Resistance Army, this horrific Christian fundamentalist terrorist organization, the Lord's Resistance Army, and Joseph Kony ravaging, 10,000 child soldiers ravaging the whole north of Uganda. There was attacks near to where we were, and so on. So this was the big news story. None of the European media was picking up on any of this, but this was the massive story in the area. And when I came back, I got involved in Trinity, in the St. Vincent de Paul, in a homework club. And literally about 2 weeks after getting off the plane, I arrived in this homework club as a student teacher, and the first pupil I was given was a girl who had come and was an unaccompanied minor here without her parents from Uganda as a victim of the Lord's Resistance Army. So from Dublin to Uganda, the global conflict was now local. You could hop on a bus and unpack it. So that led to a lot of further connections, coincided with what was happening in Ireland at the time.
You were sucked in at that stage, weren't you?
Yeah, it's just utterly transformative. And they often talk about, you have to leave your home to see it in a new critical light. You can, and part of that critical light, you can see what are the positives of your own home culture and what are the negatives. But you don't have that 3D vision probably until you leave. And I suspect every immigrant sees Ireland with a new appreciation, but also a new critical awareness. And that is a pretty healthy thing as well. Augustine of Hippo, the beautiful 4th century African theologian, said, the whole world is a book, and if you do not travel, you read only one page. So there is something about travel. What is it they say? It's the only thing I spend money on that actually makes me richer. So
he sounded like a wise man.
Augustine was good.
On the subject of wise men and women, the perspective of the world that you got from your folks, like your dad was a priest. What did your mum do?
Mum worked as a nurse's aide, but she was, most of my time growing up, she was a full-time mother. So we were extremely well spoilt by my mother, because dad had a busy, heavy workload out and about. So mum definitely did an enormous amount of the parental care. My dad openly recognizes all that, so I'm not I'm not discrediting in any way. But no, we were pampered by my mother, Pam. So pampered was very appropriate.
Yeah. And what were the conversations around the dinner table?
A whole variety of things. I mean, the one thing, I grew up in a rectory, and you live very much. It's a clergyman is very much a public figure, and therefore your home is a public domain in some way. So before we had a parish hall and things like that, all the parish meetings took place in the house. So there was large periods we couldn't watch Coronation Street or anything on the telly because the noise would drift into where the meetings were next door. And you can have very, very different experiences in the same home. I remember, a couple of things. This is just, and you don't think of this as anything other than normal. I remember the phone ringing. Mum and Dad weren't there. I pick it up, and it is a lady, an absolute distraught lady, because her husband has literally just had a heart attack and dropped dead in the shower. And the first person she rings is the rectory. So then I'm age 9 or something, trying to, make sense of this and console. I remember another time a local bare knuckle boxing match, and one of the victims came to the door and needed some assistance. And I was there. I think my mum just came shortly after it, and we had to help this local man just tend to his wounds and stuff like that. And then you just have all sorts. So it's a whole heady mix of things. So the dinner table, like every Christmas, that we'd always have folks who would have nowhere to go for Christmas. So there'd be a couple of folks with that. But like I say, none of that I consider in any way odd or strange, apart from the private public boundary is not there in the same way as it is for other people. But I consider that an enormous privilege. And it doesn't break me. I mean, there's not, some people can react negatively to that, can find that as too invasive, or there's too much scrutiny. Like I know in maybe rural parts, where if you're the child of a cleric, you're known in the town, and if you want to go for a pint or something like that, you can feel judged a little bit. But that was never my experience. Like I say, you're in the slipstream of a public figure, and I suspect a politician, to a certain extent, but the children of a politician might feel a slight similar, depending on the housing dynamics. But yeah, you're not. It's not a private home.
Yeah. Did you think about the job that your dad was doing?
Yeah, but like when you're so in it, you sort of don't critically reflect on it. And I mean, I consider Christian ministry like an incredible privilege, but I've worked in it for 20 years before I got ordained, and I wouldn't change that for the world. It's a different rank, rank isn't even the right term. It's just a different dynamic where I'm at now, and I feel the season that I've done. I was a chaplain in Dublin City University. I worked in a beautiful multicultural Methodist church in West Dublin, Blanchardstown, and all of that is part of my story. And like, Dad was ordained at 23, I'm 40. His dad again took, had a different style, different dynamic, operating in a my grandfather was born in 1881, so he lived through a vastly different era. He would have been 31 when the Titanic sank. So each to their own. You each have your own generational charge, and you take hopefully what is good of your inheritance, but also you're moving towards the future, offering something new as well. So
there was a magnet pulling you to particular topics on a regular basis. Like there was some really big, strong patterns being formed in your life. Can you talk to me about some of them?
Yeah, well, I guess when I said about social conscience and social justice, and that's a kind of theme across all my siblings in many ways. My sister had worked for many years in children's rights. My brother Ian is involved in a lot of disability activism, particularly around sight, and that's related to his own story and his own sporting experience. So I think there is a drive there on recognizing the needs of those who have been marginalized in society for whatever reason, and the need for those issues to be addressed and looking at causes. So by going to Africa, having that very transformative experience, there was lots of influential people that encouraged and supported me. One was a Rwandan refugee, Fidel Mutwarasibo. Dr. Fidel, a PhD from UCD in sociology, but he had fled the genocide in Rwanda. He was part of the parish, and he was one of the founders of the Africa Centre in Ireland. So he got me involved in Africa Centre and looking at African international relations, development issues, and African-Irish relations. How does Ireland relate to Africa? How does Africa relate to Ireland? And all of that just supported. But in the course of that, I mean, what's happened in Ireland in the last 20 years, Ireland is an island nation, so we are an immigrant nation of Firbolgs, Celts, Vikings, Normans, English, Scots, all sorts make up an island nation. But in the last 20 years, that migration coming from outside of Europe has been a significant demographic feature. And therefore, it's put, our values like Céad Míle Fáilte and things to the test. It put our own self-understanding as being obviously we are an immigrant people. There's more people of Irish descent outside of Ireland than there are inside of Ireland. And Mary Robinson referred to the Irish diaspora as the fifth province. So, we have this massive immigrant narrative. So we are so reliant on the welcome the Irish people got across the world. So suddenly now we need to extend or see what that welcome looks like in Ireland. So that might get involved, as I said, in the St. Vincent de Paul and Trinity and an unaccompanied Centre for Unaccompanied Minors. And that was at the very, very earliest days of direct provision. And that has led to a whole dynamic and a whole set of things that I'm passionate about and feel are important in an Irish context.
And tell me, if this was an exam and we were looking at our scorecard regarding how well we've done around, the Céad Míle Fáilte with people from areas where there was a lot of misfortune, how have we done?
Depends how you examine what your criteria are. Some will say we've scored higher than other European countries, like especially the United Kingdom post-Brexit. Like our commitment to Ukrainian refugees, the welcome of Ukrainian refugees is higher than per capita than it is in the United Kingdom. And we haven't entered into a completely unethical policy with Rwanda on the reception of migrants. On the other hand, Ireland, I think, is particularly in the Republic, the dominant narrative is obviously we gained our independence in 1922. We engaged in a post-coloniality, blowing up a Nelson's Pillar and other things, George in Dublin. And so to a move away, how do we reclaim our Gaelic Irish roots? And that was British was seen as belonging to a period of oppression. And now we're finding our freedom and our independence and so on. And all of that is why we are to be a welcome people, because we're a post-colonial people. I think, that sounds good. The reality is indicators around racism suggest that we do have a very, very serious issues which we need to look very deeply and hard at ourselves. And there are some experiences which really are frightening in Irish society and is not helped by the internet, not helped by the way people publicly discourse. But racist attacks, racist discrimination is increasing, as the indicators suggest. So I think we need to be serious about what narratives we tell ourselves. Are we this great land of emancipation and freedom and independence, or actually do we have some sinister forces which we need to confront? And so I think I wouldn't want to give a score, but I think there is lots and lots and lots of work to be done.
Yeah. I was going to push you and force you to give you that score, both from organization, governmental point of view, the official score, and then a score from a human nature point of view. Maybe we shouldn't put a score on it anyway. That mightn't be helpful. But what's our problem with it? Do you understand it? You've obviously worked very, very close to it, and you're involved in a lot of initiatives to bring people together and everything. Have you understood for all of that time and everything. Are you getting it? Like, do you understand why there's a problem, and do you know where the solution lies?
I mean, the problem at its heart, it's about broken relationships. It's human interaction. It's human connection. And when human connection is good, there is peace, there is prosperity, people can flourish, people are well. And when there is a rupturing of human relationships for a variety of reasons, then there is hurt, there is damage, there is injury, there is distrust, there is. So the more we can live together well, the more we can connect with one another. That is a criticism of direct provision, that it's large centres in often isolated areas that offer no. I mean, they're designed to not to be integration centres, because the theory is people are being processed in their application, and therefore they're in a kind of legal limbo. But I mean, we are relational creatures. We see from COVID what isolation has done to mental health. And, I have seen from direct provision, it crush people, destroy people. And I visited somebody in a psychiatric ward who had been 13 years in direct provision. And they asked me to look in their bag. And I looked in their bag, and they had just received their papers. And that's a system gone mad, that it could be so destructive. And then at the end of it, you were to receive your papers to stay in Ireland. And yet we have destroyed you in the process.
Congratulations, you're now part of it.
So they're obviously direct provision. The government is committed to a complete reform of it, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that. But I'm involved in a project, City of Sanctuary, and Schools of Sanctuary, and I was involved with Universities of Sanctuary when I was in Dublin City University, and that's just about getting schools all over Ireland, cities all over Ireland, just thinking in terms of what are our capacity. Because I firmly believe, that narrative, as I said, the Irish self-understanding has been an independent people. We're very proud. How many main streets are called O'Connell Street? Dublin, Limerick, other streets around Ireland, named after the great liberator, Daniel O'Connell, who was a great friend of Frederick Douglass, the African-American emancipator and liberator, the two great liberators who met in Dublin in 1845 and met in Cork and met in Waterford and spoke together and aligned those two campaigns. Al Lewis and John Hume met together as the great liberators in Derry and in Alabama, I think, as well. So we like to think of ourselves as being a civil rights people, as being champions of those who are marginalized, champions of those who are victims of economic oppression and so on. And that is great if we can deliver through on it. But I think Daniel O'Connell would have a lot to say about direct provision, I think. And those are the kind of things. So there is something in the Irish psyche that I think is really positive. We do wish to be a welcoming, warm, gracious, compassionate, caring people. There's lots to suggest that we are, and it's just a kind of appeal to the good nature of Ireland as a welcoming place, as schools of welcome, universities welcome, and to build that whole culture, how we become a welcoming community.
What works, Philip? Because you've been part of a lot of initiatives, and I'm sure you've witnessed transformation that gives you encouragement to do even more. Is it very simple, or is it very complicated?
It's human to human. It's me and you, I and thou, as Martin Buber says, which is the real me meeting with the real you. It's inviting people over for dinner. It's getting the bus together. It's playing football together. It's human connection as fully as we can in community with one another. Now, obviously, if you don't speak English, human connection becomes a real problem. You're into Brian Friel's translations territory. How do you sustain relations when language is a barrier? How do you sustain relations when there could be other differences? But we're using all that. I mean, the key just really is: can we connect? Can we just build those relations with one another? There's a beautiful concept which is a concept which was really galvanized by an African theologian, but it's popular in all sorts of forums now from South Africa. Ubuntu. Ubuntu means I am who I am because you are who you are. And it's at the absolute epicenter of a particular African philosophy that for you to be you, I have to be me, and it's in that differences that we shape and form and connect with one another. So we are enormously interconnected creatures. That's how we have been hardwired. And in Europe, we do isolation and independence more so than other continents. The nuclear family is not a concept that exists in many other parts of the world. Living in apartment blocks behind, where you've got a key in your security code and go up an elevator and live in a box, and or nursing homes. Nursing homes don't exist in lots of cultures. The idea when you're a certain age and your physical ability is a certain, that you go to a certain place to be cared for, that doesn't exist in other cultures. So, and yet I think Ireland is still has, like they talk about mehel and things like that, the harvest sharing of one another. I still think, or philanthropy, we still give very generously to charity. We still are a generous people. So how we harness all that to connect, and not live isolated from one another.
When you witness some of the things that you do witness in Ireland, do you get a bit cynical when you hear about the Irish and how we're so good at all of that kind of thing, what we're supposed to be good at?
I mean, one really, really frightening area is online, and that's absolutely petrifying. When I worked in Blanchardstown Methodist Church, one of the families that came there and one of the young guys that was involved in the ministry was George and Kenshaw. And George was very tragically killed by the guards on the 30th of December 2020. And I was really, really absolutely shocked and horrified by that. But I think what made it utterly galling, like sickening to the core, was that there was a whole outpouring of complete lies that spread like wildfire through various channels. And 3 days later, the Garda press office issued a statement and said that it was not true, many of the accusations that were swirling around. And it was a targeted assault, but just frightening what people would believe and what people would share and the kind of discourse that people would engage in and the online stuff, it's not discourse, it's just violence. But it's really frightening how just you can set that on fire. There's what's like paper torch for just. So I think how we dialogue with one another, how do we speak to one another, what's constructive, how do we build a society for the common good. So much of that is lost in a really vicious online forum, and Ireland has a big issue with how we speak to one another online.
Yeah, well, for me, in a funny way, and it's not very funny at all, but Trump made that acceptable. He brought, he's the leader of the free world, whatever language you want to use around that, voted in by so many people. He actually made it acceptable to say the things out loud that none of us would say anywhere. And he gave people permission then to join in and row in. And you saw it here. I've seen it even, people close enough to me that I've literally fallen out of, and I see them being extremely racist and, let them go back to where they came from, taking our slots in school from our students and taking our jobs and all this kind of business. And this is from people who barely worked a day in their lives, just absolute vile. I don't know. I think there's a little echo chamber as well with social media. And I think COVID didn't help it at all. Suddenly if you're talking shite like that down the pub, your buddy or your neighbor will fairly quickly say, come on, Philip, will you shut the hell up with that stuff? You're talking a load of nonsense.
Yeah.
But if you're swimming in your tiny little fish bowls with similar types, and of course the algorithms are feeding you all this nutjob rubbish anyway, you tend to think that it's normal suddenly, that everyone in my little circle is behaving in exactly the same way. And it becomes really, really bad.
And you see, maybe that's even, there's no silver bullet for addressing some of these things, but the more we're connected, I mean, they talk about online disinhibition syndrome, ODS, that the minute I have a screen between you and me, somehow, for some psychological reason, I feel able to deconstruct you or dehumanize you to the point where I can say things that I would never dare say to your face. So, like, you meet an internet troll and they might actually be this shy, introverted person, or it's just not how they would speak, but get behind a computer screen, and for some reason there is 1 degree of separation that allows a kind of violence to flourish. So, the more and COVID then exacerbates that, just the disconnection. How do you have difficult conversations well when you're disconnected? And robots can only take us so far. The digital age is just floundering in trying to assist us have conversations around what is the common good, what's good for all of us. How does society grow and develop and benefit, rather than, as you say, the fish bowls just fighting with each other, reinforced by their algorithms.
Yeah, and sometimes as well, of course, the robots have taken a lot of the human connection away from things.
Yeah.
So that voice explaining something instead of just giving you a yes or a no or whatever can sort out a lot of things. Your love of music and the Discovery Gospel Choir, will you talk to me about that?
Yeah, that started 18 years ago, and that came out of that refugee centre I mentioned in Phibsborough, which for unaccompanied minors, and a couple of students from Trinity, where I was with the St. Vincent de Paul, and a couple of students with the Homework Club in Phibsborough. Church of Ireland was looking at doing something like at African services, and the choir came out of that. It came together once, and then got a phone call to come to the next thing, and then appeared on the telly, and then the phone didn't stop ringing. Archbishop Desmond Tutu came to our first birthday. We've done a lot of things. We have a concert on this Tuesday night. We were performing in Mountjoy Square at a big festival, Gospel Rising, on last Sunday. So we're still going. It's about 17 different nationalities, singing about 30 different languages, and just trying through music. Because you can have social theories, you can have scientific theories, you can have all sorts of different ways on how do you do human connection. But the arts really are so fruitful, because film, drama, painting, but especially music, just has an ability to speak and to make a point in a way that a political theory just can't. In South Africa, I remember the anti-apartheid movement. There was a famous saying that rather than having guns, bullets, and bombs, it was they had the greatest social weapon of them all: 4-part harmony, and it can melt hearts and visualize it and see it. So it is just an attempt to be a meeting place through song, through music, through dance, for different cultures in Ireland, as reflecting the new Ireland, the modern Ireland.
Yeah, I was at a charity gig for Ukraine, and it was a gospel choir as part of the whole lineup, for the evening, for the musical lineup. Something incredible about so many people singing together. It's uplifting. I think when you witness it, it moves you. You're a very cold character if what you experience doesn't take you somewhere, and it's uplifting. There's togetherness in people and everything. And maybe, again, we're having that COVID conversation. That lack of togetherness, I think, absolutely killed everyone. And I think a lot of those problems has a big volume button on them as a result. So, Philip, you're making a big difference, working on a lot of your passions, bringing people together. And now you can do that from a different place. So from the 12th of September, 2021, and thereafter, how is that going to be different for you with your passion and what you want to achieve and moving things along? How is that going to change everything? I hope you'll join me in part 2, where Philip chats about the changing role of the church in Irish society, the relationship between the Catholic and Protestant church, and what he hopes to achieve in his new life as a priest. Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.